So one of my favorite details to add when I'm refinishing furniture is a custom design on the cabinet doors. So when I came across this vintage Stanley oak dresser, I scooped it up right away, even though it was all the way in the back of the store in an area they typically put items that they don't even put up for sale. But I bought it anyway because I've been looking for a dresser just like this. It has 4 cabinet doors all across the front, and I thought it would be really, really fun to do an end-to-end design. But what I discovered about halfway through the project was I might have been a little too ambitious. So let's see how this went and see if I really did bite off more than I can chew.
I'm Amy. I build and revive furniture, often adding something new to something old. I'm sharing tips, tricks, and methods on how to give old pieces a new lease on life. Welcome to my shop. This is a 1960s or maybe 1970s dresser made by Stanley. And as I said, it's not in great shape. Not only is this piece absolutely filthy, the oak top definitely needs to be completely refinished. And I'm going to remove the old base and build a new, more modern looking one. Besides the veneer damage, I need to see if there's going to be any more repairs. So I'm going to take out all the drawers, check the drawer tracks and all the dovetail joints to make sure everything's still in good shape. And I always seem to find random things behind the drawers. I've done this a few different ways, but for me, it's most efficient to build the new bases first before I do all the cleaning, sanding, and painting. So the first step is to flip the dresser over and see what the underside looks like. Different manufacturers have different construction methods for these pieces. Sometimes it's really easy to remove the old base and there's a nice level surface to install a new one. Unfortunately, that's not going to be the case here. You can see there's no apron across the back that lines up with the height of the front. So I'm going to have to address that. And now I have a nice level surface to construct a new base, and I can start to get exact measurements. I use 2x2 lumber to construct the bases, and I always use hardwood. Dense hardwoods are much better suited to support the weight of these large, heavy pieces. In this case, I'm going to use ash. It has a similar grain pattern to the oak tops, and it's a light enough color that I can stain it to match whatever the tops are going to end up looking like, which I don't know yet. And ash tends to be a bit less expensive than oak. I cut them to rough dimensions on my miter saw, then to exact dimension on my table saw using a miter gauge. I also add a taper to the legs using a tapering jig. Then, because I just think it looks really nice, I add a small chamfer edge to those tapers. I'm constructing the base using pocket holes and glue, but this time I'm not going to attach it to the dresser just yet. I'm wondering if it'll be easier to install the base after all the painting is done, so we'll see if I'm right about that. If you want a better tutorial about how I build these bases, I'm going to link a few other videos where I go into it in a lot more detail. Now that the base is constructed, I can flip the dresser back over and remove the hardware and start removing this old molding. Thankfully, the glue had pretty much worn out, so they weren't hard to remove using a flat metal tool and a hammer. After giving this thing a really good cleaning with Crud Cutter and rinsing with warm water, I started to assess the top a little more carefully. This doesn't happen very often, but the finish was just about gone. So I was able to skip the chemical stripper altogether and just use my carbide scraper to get what was still kind of hanging on. Oh, and there was a spot of veneer that I wanted to glue back down before doing anything else. These little glue syringes are so handy to get into these small spaces. Okay, so this is really the nitty-gritty of this video. I have 2 sets of doors here, and what I want to do is design a pattern for each door that's a mirror image of its neighbor. And I know I want to use at least 2 different size slats of wood in what I would consider an intricate geometric pattern. After setting up the jig, I started ripping a 1.5 inch thick piece of red oak. I love the simplicity of how this jig works. Once I set it to the thickness I want, I can make safe, repeatable cuts and I don't have to keep resetting the jig. Instead, I move the table saw fence as my piece gets narrower. And I keep the jig in place when I switch to a 3/4 inch piece of poplar. Will this be enough? I have no idea. I'm going to add a chamfer edge profile to each slat, and not just because I want to be fancy. These slats are exactly the same thickness, so when I place them on the panel, they'll all just kind of blend together unless I give them some kind of an edge profile. I always start by establishing the horizontal and vertical centers of the door panels so the pattern is symmetrical. And since I was going to be using angles too, I drew 45-degree angles out from each corner. To keep things sort of simple, I'm only going to be working with straight edges and 45-degree angles. I'm going to attach each slat with glue and secure with a few brad nails. It's so important to place the first pieces correctly. If they're not at that perfect 45-degree angle, it will throw all of the rest of the pieces off. Believe it or not, this was the easiest part. Once I figured out the right dimension, I cut 4 of those pieces. Then I cut 4 more in the mirror image. But it wasn't always a perfect formula. Sometimes the dimension was a bit off and I had to go back and trim. Maybe I'm just too much of a perfectionist, but I really wanted these pieces to be perfectly flush with each other. Then when I had pretty much run out of oak, I switched to the smaller pieces of poplar, and I started placing them in the opposite direction to see how that looked. I should have realized at this point that my design was getting pretty complicated, and I was gonna need potentially hundreds of these smaller pieces to fill out the space, but I didn't realize that. Instead, I decided to make the pattern even more complicated. And you probably saw this coming a mile away, but I ran out of poplar and I had to rip down some more. It was at this point that I really started to regret my ambitious design idea. And I briefly considered changing to a less complicated one. But I couldn't help but wonder if I'd regret that. Like, I let myself chicken out. So I put my head down and I pushed through, even though I'd already been at it for more than 8 hours. In case you're wondering, yes, I do see that my pattern leaves an extremely small but very obvious open space. I'm not sure yet how I'm going to address that, so in the meantime, I'm going to fill a million little nail holes. So one thing I will give myself credit for is that I had the foresight to plan on painting the slatted wood pattern. It's more forgiving if I don't have to worry about how different grain patterns and wood tones are going to look when they're together. Plus, the oak would probably have looked good stained, but poplar is not considered a stain grade wood. As a matter of fact, it notoriously does not stain well. Anyways, if I ever work up the nerve to do this again, maybe I'll use prettier wood and try a more natural look. Oh, and if you were hoping I'd be doing some wild or bold color, or if you're just a hater of neutrals, prepare to be disappointed. I chose this color because I think it's going to look beautiful with the warm medium tone of the oak top. Remember earlier when I said I thought it might be easier to install the new base last? Well, I think I was wrong about that. While it was easier to not have to tape off the base for painting, it was nerve-wracking to have to flip the dresser over again after the painting to install the base. And of course I had to flip it back over again and then cover the painted parts in plastic to apply the clear coat to the top and the base. So I don't think I saved any time at all. Anyways, the paint I use doesn't require a clear coat, and honestly, I really love the sheen without it. This piece has come a long way, but I think we need a quick reminder of where we started. And here's how it looks now. So I spent a total of 12 hours on just the cabinet door design alone. Do you think it was worth it? The time and the backache? Let me know what you think in the comments. I didn't feature them in the video, but you may have seen a pair of nightstands lurking in the background that I refinished to coordinate with the dresser, and thankfully I had just enough scrap pieces of oak to make a simple pattern on the drawer fronts. I can't wait to share my next project with you. Make sure you like and subscribe so you don't miss what's next. Thanks for watching. I'll see you again soon.